Thanks for having me here. This is, I think, the third time I've been up this way to speak to the group here. It's always an enjoyable drive up. Always got a good reception. Always got a good turnout as well. So thanks for coming along. I'd like to just start before I launch into the talk itself. Last year when I came up, I was talking about issues like currency, independence, and the growth, the SNP Growth Commission report that had recently been out at that point, and that sparked a lot of discussion, especially up here with Inverness, who then got together a book club to actually study the Growth Commission report, produced a report on their opinions and thoughts and analysis of it. I don't know how many folk were here who were involved in that. A few? Yeah, a few. We then published that report on our website, put it out there, and we got it to the National Assemblies. And guys, it looks like you've had a bit of an impact. It's been really interesting. A lot that we are now starting to see a shift in opinion happening. If you saw the National yesterday and some of the news coming out about the motion that will be at the SNP conference on the Growth Commission, looks like they have been hearing the discontent, especially around the currency. I should say the move isn't quite as far as I would have liked it to be. It sounds like the transition, while they're saying it will be the transition from independence to getting a currency will be quicker than the original plan, it sounds like it's still going to be pinned to those 6 tests in the Growth Commission report, which leads me to think, is it actually going to be quicker? I'm not sure. We're going to have to get a bit more clarity on this. A bit more discussion is needed. But thanks to the group up here, particularly for helping feed into the discussion and getting to where we are. So, shows you the power of local activism. Let's get more of that. Nice segue into the main talk tonight, which is on development councils. This is a paper we published last year, an attempt to try and reform local democracy in Scotland. You don't hear me? Is that any better up the back?
Yes.
Thank you. You can't hear me. Wave at me, shout. Right. So local democracy. We're going to be talking a little bit about how Scotland compares to other countries, because we often get into that mode of thinking that what we have is normal. When we're Scotland, especially in the field of local democracy, we're very far from it. I'll discuss a little bit about how we've got to where we are, a bit about why local democracy is important. We often hear from other places in the Highlands and Islands that the local democracy doesn't really work for there because everybody's focused on this either. So maybe it's time to think about what we can do. This isn't just an issue for rural areas or the islands or other places that are far from the seats of power. It's for the local areas that are right next to the seat of power, but who are still getting overlooked. So Scotland's local democracy is something that has moulded itself out of centuries of slow evolution. We started, as far back as the 12th century. There's a bit of a dispute over which area was the first royal borough in Scotland. My local area of Lanark has a reasonable claim, but I think it's fairly disputed, so I won't come down on sides in case there's anyone near here that might take issue with that. Yep. The royal boroughs were it came out of the feudalism system about setting up these areas that could levy local taxes and have a bit more local control. Skip forward a few centuries, you get to the late 19th century and the founding of the county councils, which were given powers over justice and policing and local roads and other ordinances. 1894, the parish councils were set up. These things so Scotland started to look as if it had quite a decentralised form of government by that point. Then in the mid-20th century, things started to contract. We got a rationalisation into 30-odd counties, just under 30 boroughs, and almost 200 smaller boroughs. I'll go there. That was then shrunk further in the 70s to 9 regional councils, 3 island councils, and 53 district councils. That was abolished again a few decades later. into the system more or less that we currently have now with 32, we call them local authorities, but let's be honest, let's start calling them regional authorities. There was a bit of politics in that rationalisation. This was a way of breaking up some of the district councils that had been most opposed to the poll tax. This was revenge. This system also set up about 1,200 community councils, which sounds great until you start to consider what's happened with those community councils. Again, as Morgan was saying, you do have good examples of really good, really effective community councils in areas. You also have areas that have ossified and fossilised community councils that are almost invisible. Nobody knows who's on them or how they got there, and the names don't seem to change very much from year to year, and you don't get to hear about what they're discussing. You certainly don't really see much of the impact they're having. Then you get areas like my village that doesn't even have a community council. There are a potential of 1,200 community councils that could be in Scotland. We're probably lucky if we have half that number actually in existence. And as I say, many of them probably not that effective. Actually quite funny when I went after the Indie Ref, once I started getting into my political radicalisation, I thought, oh, I could set up a community council in my village. So I approached the local village coordination group, who are there sort of in lieu of a community council, and I asked them, have you ever thought about reforming yourself into a community council, or would you help me in founding one? And, oh no, we don't want to do that, we might have to have elections. So what's the problems here? Well, this one's particularly apt. This is a nice little chart from our atlas. That little dot there, that represents 38 square kilometres. That's the average size of a local council in Europe. That's the area of Highland and Island Council. It's 25,657 square kilometres. It's one of the largest local councils in Europe. Probably one of the largest sort of local councils anywhere outside maybe America. Oh, to be fair, you've got Australia. I actually know someone who's on the Senate in Western Australia, and his constituency is the Mining and Pastoral region, which is the largest democratically elected constituency in the world, at 28 times the size of Scotland. Population 62,000. So what we've seen over, at least the past several decades of reorganisation is every time we get a reorganisation, we get more centralisation of power. Politicians aren't just clingy to the power they've got, they tend to want to grab more when they can. The general consensus we found when we were researching our paper on development councils is that regional authorities are relatively powerful, they have a lot of control, but they're nowhere near local enough. You guys certainly see it in this regional authority. The community councils, when they work well, are really local. They're really effectively local, but they're nowhere near powerful enough. They don't have anywhere near any kind of statutory power. They've got a special status when it comes to planning, consulting and planning decisions, and they'll often get a small annual budget of maybe about £400 to buy stationery. That's not an effective local government right there. Another little chart there showing you the average population of units of local democracy around Europe, and no prizes for guessing who the outlier is. That's Scotland right there. Highlands is 700 times the size of the European average. The average local council has almost 10 times the population of the average European local council. This is one of the areas where Scotland does even worse than England, because they still have a lot of their parish councils which are much more local than anything we've got. But whenever you go into one of these systems and you say we want to reform it, people start to shy away, for good reason. Reformation of this kind is often very expensive, especially when you go in and say we'd like to like to try and update your IT system. Government procurement of IT systems is about the most horrific sentence you can say to a civil servant. So the approach we have taken in our paper is maybe not as radical as you could have done. We haven't went in and said, right, blank slate time, let's build the country that we should have if we were given a completely new one and had the ability to build from scratch. Unfortunately, this is one of the cases where we have to consider what we have and reform from there and build from there. So we are proposing a slightly more gradual form of redistributing power, but we're doing it in a way that tries to keep a lot of the infrastructure, especially the IT infrastructure, intact. So that's something to keep in mind when we discuss how this works. The model is effectively based on taking the best ideas from the best community councils that we can speak to and the best development trusts we could speak to. Development trusts are often these bodies that they're not always really that in the way of democratic in the form that they're not a democratic structure within the government. Their funding isn't derived from taxation, it's often derived from grants and loans and whatever they can pull together. But a lot of these development trusts do a lot of good work because they're on the ground and they can see things that need improved in local communities. I don't know if you have any development trusts nearby that with any noteworthy projects. I'm afraid this is one of the areas I don't really know the area well enough to say.
Well, I mean, we're just talking here. We've got Stratherick and Foyer's development,
yeah.
Like a community trust, which is basically been formed because a load of money has come from wind farms and,
yeah.
and energy schemes in the area into the community. But I don't know if that's what you're talking
about. That's precisely it. You often find that they can get money from local renewable energy. That's a topic for another discussion, is how do we reform the renewable energy wealth of Scotland to benefit us instead of the multinationals that are mostly getting it. Always look for an excuse to get invited back. So we formed this body that we've called a development council. The system, we said, has to have three traits. It has to be powerful. It has to have the ability to actually effect change in its local community. It has to be universally democratic. Where you set these things up, everybody in that community has to have the ability to have a say on how it's run. And it has to be representative, so you need democratically elected and accountable office holders on the body. What we do is we effectively open things up to the community to say, where do you want your development council? This would be a fairly massive exercise in citizens' assemblies. Rather than having someone come in and start to draw lines and circles on the map, which Britain has a very long history of doing very badly, allow communities to decide what is your most cohesive community block that you can form. So that might be an Inverness Development Council. It might be several in Inverness, each with its own community. For Glasgow, you might imagine a Govan Community Council, for instance. Out in my way in rural Clydesdale, you could think maybe about a Clydesdale Development Council, or you could think about one that just covers my own village, or maybe several villages around me. But it's up to the community to be able to go in and say, right, we have the map, we know what works here, we'll draw the circles. The Development Council would then have the ability to look at the powers that are currently held by the regional authority and start drawing powers from them. Now, there would be reserved matters. This is something that the development councils would have to discuss with the regional authority, that there would be powers that are genuinely best held at that level. Maybe healthcare or social services, could be something like that. But it's an open-ended discussion, we haven't been too prescriptive on this. But everything else, the development council would have the ability to draw those powers down when it needed them and for as long as it needed them. So when we were in the early stages of researching this, Robin went around around the west coast. I think he was in Troon, and he was saying, well, It might be that you don't actually want to draw down the power over emptying the bins, and someone stuck their hand up and said, actually, yeah, we actually kind of do want to draw down the power over bins, because during the tourist season, out on the beachfront, the council never empties the bins often enough. We'd like to be able to hire a few extra contractors to go and do that. So that's maybe an example of what can be done. Again, you guys know your local area far better than I do, so I can see a few of you already thinking along the lines of, what could I do if I had just had the ability to just say, right, give me that power for a while and I'll go and sort it, or give me that power for a season, like the tourist season. Crucially though, and again, going back to the not meddling too much with the infrastructure, what would happen here is the civil servants at the regional authority would still be doing their job in exactly the same way, still governing that particular power. It's just that when the Development Council drew it down, instead of talking to the councillors, they now talk to you, or whoever's on the DC. That keeps all the infrastructure ticking away as it is. As I said, development councils have to be democratic. So in our proposal, all development councils across Scotland would have elections, maybe every 4 or 5 years, and the election day would be the same across Scotland, across all development councils, because that's a good way of keeps the national news cycle looking at the issue, keeps higher public awareness of it, and gives you a bit more engagement, fosters a bit more civic responsibility over the proposal. Once the office holders are elected though, you then have a citizens' assembly embedded into the development council. At least annually it would meet and it would determine the mandate for the development council for the next year, and it would judge the development council on its previous year's performance. This is how you keep the thing not just representative, because you've got your elected officials, but truly democratic, because everybody who lives in the area for the DC can turn up to that citizens' assembly and have a good moan, or critical positive feedback, whatever you're doing. One crucial thing is, when we're talking about the projects that these development councils do, it has to be something that is about development. The hint is in the name, it's why we kept that name, Development Council. What this cannot be allowed to do is become a system of fobbing off services from the regional authority. You already see this. Scotland has a long history of regional authorities fobbing services off, often through privatisation, often through PFI, and we've been hit with a very expensive legacy of that that process. We can't allow that to be repeated. So the development council wouldn't just be throwing powers at them, say go and keep doing what you're doing with this. It has to be about doing new things with it. Of course, whenever you want to do more of something, someone asks, how do you pay for it? Now this is something that at Weal we're still working on. We're still looking at ways that we can reform local taxation, because that's another big problem in Scotland. And it's something that is high up the agenda. You've seen the current debates in Holyrood over local council funding, especially between the SNP and the Greens. So at Commonweal we're currently working on a proposal to really scrap council tax and replace it with a property and a land tax that is fairer than the current council tax, but because it's also including land which is currently largely untaxed, it widens the tax base, brings in a bit more money. For the purposes of the paper here, what we assumed was that, just to keep the discussion going, we assumed that this tax would bring in the equivalent of around £50 to £100 per person per year. I have to stress, it's not a poll tax. We're not bringing back the poll tax. People did sort of panic when they got to that page in the paper. This is just purely for illustrative value. It is going to be a progressive property and land tax. There's also the possibility that things like the National Investment Bank could promote additional funding for development councils, and we're hoping that the development councils would have similar powers to the current development trusts to be able to find funding from other sources like your local renewable levies. So again, just purely for illustration, we drew up a table in the paper, a small extract from this, of a few towns and areas around Scotland, just to show you how much money that they could potentially have under this model. So places like Kirkcaldy could have somewhere between £2.5 and £5 million a year for their development council. Somewhere like Govan in Glasgow, 1.3 to 2.6, or Cumnock, you're talking up to £1.3 million a year. Really shameful of me, but I can't remember the population of Inverness off the top of my head. 60,000.
60,000 maybe, roughly.
So 6 million a year, maybe? If you had a development council covering all of the city of Inverness. But a few of you are now thinking, what could we do with that money? How could we improve it? What areas have been neglected over the past several years and decades by Highland Council that we could step in and do something with? Maybe some derelict buildings or brownfield sites. And one of my passions, I'm going around Glasgow at the moment looking at brownfield sites and thinking that would look really lovely in a permaculture garden. You could put an orchard there, you could fill that with polytunnels. I shouldn't go walking around at lunchtime, that's the problem. So, that's just the start. That is the first step in the reform. Because what you could find if these DCs become popular, become well used, well liked, well engaged with, is that they start pulling down more and more power. We then have to start thinking about other, additional funding, maybe pulling down other tax revenue or things like that. But that's the discussion that we have as these things evolve. You might find that if DCs become established and embedded enough and they start pulling down so much power that the councillors at the Highland Council start losing things to do, then you start thinking about, well, are the powers actually best suited to be embedded there, or do we start looking at the devolution settlement within Scotland? Do we start having that discussion with Holyrood over where are the powers distributed around Scotland, especially post-independence? Maybe we should take on something along the EU's philosophy of subsidiarity, where you assume that all powers are at the most local level possible and only devolve them up if necessary. Therefore, your regional authorities and Holyrood have to make the case for devolving a power up rather than the other way around. You might find that some regional authorities start to merge. We can think maybe Ayrshire, the authorities there could end up merging. Lanarkshire, North and South Lanarkshire could potentially end up merging under this model. Or you may find that regional authorities, if, for example, their reserved power is in healthcare, then maybe it makes more sense to reboundary the regional authorities along the same lines as the NHS health boards. These are again just things to float into the ether and discuss as this project develops. What we can say though, what we have now is completely insufficient. So let's start talking about what we can do better. That map there, by the way, is another map from the Atlas. Again, more copies up there. Have a wee flick through them. Buy a copy if you can. That map there is what Scotland would look like if its regional authorities had the same population as the EU average. Just shows you how far we have to go. So, thanks for that. Just my last little slide, because it's contingent on my job that I have to punt this sort of thing. Please go to our website, allofusfirst.org. You can find all of our policy papers in our library there, including the one on development councils. And absolutely support your local groups as well. The guys up here are doing an absolutely sterling job. We have books up the back for how to start a new country, both the full version and the short version, and we have some copies of the Atlas. Go and have a look up there and buy a copy if you like. If you want to continue supporting events like this, you know, donate some money, help support the local group here. And if you want to help support Weal and its work more generally, we have a donate page on our website. We don't get government money, we don't get big corporate sponsors, we don't even have adverts on our website. We're really supported by folk like yourself giving us a £5 or a £10 a month. So if you're not already a supporter and you would like to be, we have information on the website, and thank you in advance. We really appreciate your support if you decide to do that. So thank you, and I'm happy to take some questions for a while.
Okay, I'm just here to help Craig police the questions. And we're also in competition with the internet. There might be some people asking a question via the web, apparently. So, has anyone in the audience got a question? How many people have got a burning question they want to ask? Oh, okay. Yeah.
You were saying that it would be up to communities to set up their own development councils and determine what area they would cover, but I'm presuming that you're hoping to get a complete coverage of the whole of Scotland by development councils. Would it mean that some areas end up development council areas just because none of the other development councils round about want them?
This would be a two-way process with the regional authority. It has to be mediated with them, and it would almost certainly be mediated between development councils that would share boundaries, so there wouldn't be any gaps or the last person in the pitch to get picked for the team sort of issue. It has to be a quite an involved discussion.
Thank you.
Do you see these council groups as being apolitical or politically based?
Well, should they be party political based? Or right now the community councils are explicitly not party political, and there is definitely a case for that, certainly at the local level.
And would they be infiltrated?
In the sense that everybody has the right to join a political party as they see fit. You could well put down an explicit mandate as in the community councils where you're not barred from them for having a political affiliation, but your decisions are supposed to be made on a personal basis. It's one of these things that parties are a kind of inevitable process. As soon as you get two people that agree to coordinate their votes, you have a political party. But this is also where things like the Citizens' Assembly come in handy as a check against that, because that is open truly to the entire community, and they are the ones that can judge, like, okay, they are the ones that can say, for example, we think the board has become too party political, sort yourselves out or we'll vote you out. Up the back.
Right, can I just say that I was chair of Park Community Council for 6 years.
Yep.
Although I've got a political agenda myself, I didn't, as chair, use it because it's a community we were representing, not a political party.
Yep.
We had a big issue with parking here, where the council wanted to remove 105 parking spaces from this area. We fought them, and we got 79 parking spaces reinstated, much to their. We got the community behind it, we caused a stink, press, everything. We made councillors uncomfortable, in fact we were going to lynch 2 of them. Which we didn't. But the thing is, we got through without any political agenda. If we had a political agenda, the councillors would have gone against us.
Yeah.
In a way, community councils should just be for the people. No political agenda, because it would detract from what we're trying to do. I agree with nationalism. I mean, I'm a nationalist all right through. But there are certain issues when you're down at grassroots, you don't need political. You don't need to be political, you just need to get the job done. And it doesn't matter who you're up against, just go up against them and get the message through.
This is actually a really good example of how the local community council does interact from a party political perspective. Because yes, you're right. At the coalface, you know, everybody's dirty.
Another thing that's happening, they're trying to give the community councils more power. And the reason they're doing that is because they're going to cut down the number of councillors. They're going to save money in paying councillors, but get the community council to do it for free.
Yeah, that's
well. We get my budget goes by per head per population area. We used to get nearly £2,000 a year. We're down now to 860 because of austerity cuts.
Yeah.
You can't do a hell of a lot with £860.
Precisely. And that again is a really good example of the big issue that I flagged up there, that you can't just use this as a method of fobbing management of the regional authority wanting to push its job to a lower budget or taking it off the book. It has to be about doing more. So yeah, absolutely. Agree with you there. Agree with your experiences.
So, Craig, municipalities, as they're called in Europe, raise about 40% of their tax revenue themselves through kind of local government tax, business rates, council tax. Is that something you envisage happening? Or I know you talked about a slightly different system, but the equivalent of.
Now, yeah, this is something that goes into that further discussion section when we start talking about, okay, our development councils are now there, they're embedded, they want to do more. Can we start having that discussion about further devolution at all levels in Scotland? That includes tax, revenue, as well as expenditure and responsibilities. You can't have one without the other to a great degree. So yeah, you know, long term we could see a big change in the way that division between national and local taxation. Under this model as it stands, the development councils wouldn't initially be tax raising bodies. They wouldn't have that power. That's for legislative reasons and because if we start going down that route, it just becomes a logjam, and the policy wouldn't happen. Is again, if we went in and say, well, this would only work if we tore up every IT system and rebuilt it from scratch, it's just not going to happen. So it's our way of getting our foot in the door. But yes, once these things are established, we need to start thinking about the way that tax is raised at all levels in Scotland. It might be something that has to wait until after independence and we have full control of all taxation. But I would be in favour of a more European normal situation where actually your local council is your most powerful council, and it gets progressively less powerful the further away it gets. That seems to be the natural order.
I don't want to jump in. So there's a kind of European local government proposal that the Scottish Government has refused to sign up to, but which most European countries are signed up to. I can't remember exactly what it is, so do you know about that?
I'm not aware of it directly, but if you find it, email it to me. I'd be interested in reading it.
Okay, well, I've got a question. I've always tended to think, like I myself have gone through decades of not, I'm in my 60s, I've gone through decades of not having to take responsibility for the community where I live. You know, I feel, I don't know whether other people feel like this, but I'm not convinced, I still remain to be convinced that a lot of us at local level are really wanting to get involved. Because we've forgotten how to. We haven't been taught. I certainly know in my education I've not been encouraged to get involved, and I'm just wondering how we get over that that apathy, if you like, that side of things.
I don't think the apathy is, just from my experiences of going around a lot of places, you know, the apathy is born out of lack of opportunity rather than, you know, lack of initiative, if you want to put it that way. Results of it. Kind of especially when they maybe don't quite agree with what they've been doing, you kind of want to step in and I could do better than them. So yeah, you're right though that we've went so long without being like a normal European democracy that we don't know quite what it looks like. But I am hopeful, I am optimistic that if we give people the opportunity, they will engage, and it will rapidly become a normal thing, especially when you're right, education is a key part of this. That's maybe something that is going to have to start in the schools, and it's going to take years and decades to work up. But yeah.
Would you see the Development Council having like offices and some paid staff, things like that, or would it all be volunteers? What do you think?
Initially, a lot of it would be volunteer. Again, that's just because it's running from a standing start. It's one of these things that, as again, it would become more powerful and as it got embedded. We do have a vision of having what we've called a town manager, almost like a town mayor, and they're the final sort of go-to person, because the buck has to stop somewhere. I can envisage at least that office being paid. So yeah, it's something that I'm open for it to be discussion. Paid positions are obviously they're a bit more embedded. There's a bit more responsibility to them. With the somewhat downside is you can then look at the problems of careerism within it, but that's the same in any job, any government level.
Especially services within a community, if this is bringing down powers from the council level, there's also opportunities for the council to reward people who get involved in the shaping of their local areas and services that they can access.
Yeah, so you can imagine it as the Development Council does pull down more powers, then funding that would have went to the regional authority starts getting pulled down alongside it, and that can be used to help support the development.
Could that not be quite a sticky sort of point? You know, how much do we?
How much and where? Absolutely. Which is why it's in the further discussion section of our paper.
That would be quite a tricky point.
There's no easy solution to this, and only necessary ones.
How does that work? You're saying it's modelled on other systems. Does it work elsewhere that they have ways of doing it, or in other countries?
It's modelled on the best aspects of the Community Council and Development Trust model that we have in Scotland. There aren't very many countries in Europe that do that pull-down method of governance, mostly because most of them have a stronger sense of subsidiarity and a draw up rather than a draw down. But I think Scotland's still quite a way away before we can flip that around, especially while we're still part of the UK, where devolution ultimately lies at Westminster. Power devolved is power retained, and they have the right at all times to pull power away or to legislate over. That would ultimately be the ultimate barrier to a truly subsidiary system in Scotland.
Do you think that subsidiarity was a favourite word of Mr. Major many years ago?
From the sense of he was going for a management and fob off approach.
Yeah.
But he was also a European to that respect, and he was soaking up a lot of those ideas. So don't be too harsh on him for that particular point.
Any more questions?
As I say, when I was in England, a lot of the parish councils have, as you say, it's part of the council tax, whichever way you do it, was in the system. And I think when they decided to remodel in Scotland, they got rid of the money that the parish council, the town councils used to have, and that basically, as you said, they said, oh, we looked around parts of Scotland, they haven't got enough people to do the things, and they made the centralisation, and
a lot of centralisation of funding happened at that time as well. Also breaking up things like the common good funds, or at least making them so opaque that they've kind of disappeared to a great respect. Edinburgh in particular has a bit of a problem there. That's a discussion where you kind of want Andy Whiteman along, because he can talk to you for a week on that on that particular bugbear.
Following up on Andy Whiteman, are you getting much traction from the political parties in your ideas when it comes to development councils?
we've had quite a favourable response from the Greens on this. I think the response from the SNP has been essentially none at the moment. They're not thinking about this really. They're more focused on essentially getting over that local council funding hurdle just to get the budget going. They're not really thinking about reform. I should say neither are any of the other parties. So we're still at the early stages of this campaign. It's not stopped us before. This is how we got the National Investment Bank. We started from being literally the only ones talking about it to it becoming a £2 billion government policy. Yeah. So
to pick up actually something Morgan said is that at the moment we have a kind of top-down structure,
yeah,
which actually disempowers people in the communities. If we actually had people engaging, participating in decision making and having responsibility, I'm talking about financial responsibility for organising services for themselves, we would actually be kind of helping people to stand up and kind of, and I hate this phrase, the Scottish cringe factor, but when we can't, would actually disappear because we're actually enabling people to take responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, taking on from Morgan there, that sense of disempowerment, it can't help but affect you looking at other aspects, but also see the positive example of that from taking good examples of the community councils and the tangible effect they can have on the community when people stand up and make their case. So yeah, that's why I am optimistic about this kind of thing. If we can give people the opportunity to engage, then we can start breaking down that apathy.
I suppose at that, there's really clear evidence that the system we have now doesn't work, because only about 23% of people turn out to vote. So they're not engaged.
As a political statistician, it just fills me with pain every time I see the turnout for a local council by-election.
and in Europe, just so people know, it's about 85%.
Yeah, because again, the local democracy is the most important. You need to know you're getting a good deal there.
And on the community councils, only one in Highland had a contested election.
This is the other thing with a lot of the community councils is that they don't have the engagement is so low that the opportunity to actually contest elections is limited. I know I don't want to rag on the community councils too much because I am aware of the good ones, but there was one in my local area where someone managed to get elected in a contested election, managed to get elected based on 4 votes. They were the last on the list, to be fair, but yeah, that's how far the list went down before there was no one else. So yeah, we need a lot of improvement there.
You talked about votes. I spent a lot of time in Australia.
Yeah.
In Australia, if you don't vote, you're out of the system. No benefits, nothing. So you've got to vote, and if you don't vote, that's it. It should be done here. Because everybody has a right to vote, everybody should vote.
I have fairly strong feelings against compulsory voting purely on the ideological position that the freedom to vote should come with the freedom to not vote. But I would love to see an official abstain box on every ballot paper. I would love to see a none of the above box on the ballot paper so that we can officially distinguish people who want to actively disengage from whoever else is on the ballot and actively reject everyone from people who just didn't bother turning up.
Also, another observation. Look around you.
Yeah.
What's missing?
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
18 to 50-year-olds.
Yeah.
No. One or two.
Yep.
When you look round here, the 18 to 15-year-olds, the ones that got the vote, where are they?
Yeah. So this among many issues is an issue of kind of the format of these events, that maybe we need to think of a different way of engaging younger folk who don't want to come and spend their Saturday afternoon in the back of a pub, no matter how interesting the talk might be.
Well, I think that's one of the really good ideas about the Common Weal's thing of when we have these local elections, development council, that it's a national campaign and it's promoted nationally, because I'm quite embarrassed to say, sometimes there have been community council elections where I live and I've not known it happened.
Yep.
It just, you know, and I think that would engage young people if it was part of the national campaign.
Yeah.
But also for events like this, next time you have one, bring a friend. Or a younger relative, or...
Would it be worthwhile taking it to the universities?
Yeah, absolutely. I have spoken at a few. I do have quite an active engagement with a few groups at the universities, but it is something that... Yeah, I don't speak at... I speak in more pubs than I do universities. Let's put it that way.
Well, you can always go to the student union.
Also a good venue. There's a really interesting talk on universal basic income at my old student union at Strathclyde. Any more questions, discussions? Anyone that hasn't spoken? Oh, this is your chance. No? Well, in that case, I'll hand back over to Morgan. As I said, there's books and stuff up the back. You can come and have a look at the atlas, and if you want to come and chat to me for a wee while, I'll be here. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.